Okay, this is in Chapter 5. We are going to get into attitude and behaviors. The presentation that we're going to go over here is going to be talking about when does our behavior affect our attitude. So if you think about it, there's probably a lot of times when you have to go do something, or you're getting ready to go do something, or it's coming up, and you start thinking about that action that you have to do, and a lot of times you'll notice how your attitude begins to shift. Now remember, when we're talking about behaviors and attitude, what we're talking about is actions and feelings. So there are times when you have these different actions going on in your life, and based upon the actions that you're performing, either because of what you're doing or what others are doing with you, then that affects the feelings that you're having, which is your emotions, which then adds up into your attitude then. So what we're going to get into here talking about is what are some of the different types or different ways that behavior affects your attitude. The first one that we're going to look at then, sometimes on the video here, it says sometimes we stand up for what we believe in, and but there's also times that we come to believe in what we stand up for. Now, if you think about that, it is a pretty complex sentence there, but basically the idea behind that is a lot of times that we think about things and we take in information before we begin to analyze it, and then once we got that information, then we go out and we do an action on it. So we'll read about something, or we'll hear about something, and then based upon that knowledge, it forces us or gets us to go do something. But a lot of times we also end up doing things without thinking about it, and then based upon those actions, we basically then, our minds wrap around that action as a justification for it, and we build a consensus in our mind about the behavior in order to justify what we've done. So that's what we're kind of looking at here. All right, the first one is role-playing. Role-playing is basically the idea there that it's a set of norms that defines how people in a given situation, social situation, ought to behave. We do all kinds of role play all the time. Again, if you just think about the example, maybe you have a coworker, and that coworker is someone that you hung around with and stuff at work, and you both make fun of the bosses, and you talk about trash about the bosses or about your the supervisor over you, and all of a sudden that person gets a promotion. Your friend does, and next thing you know, you begin to notice he acts differently. Well, that's because he's in a new role. As we move up into different roles, our social norms begin to adjust, and consequently, our behaviors adjust, and our attitudes adjust. And we do this quite often. Your role that you do when you go out with your friends is totally different than the role that you do when you're with your parents, or that you are when you're with your kids, or whatever the case may be. But what happens a lot of times is because we take on so many different roles in our life that we sometimes get caught up into these changes without being aware of how these roles are affecting our attitude. And a lot of times that can cause a lot of problems. One of the videos we're going to watch in class over this is the Zimbardo video about the Stanford prison study. So we're going to get more into that in class, talking about that then. John Johnson gave an interesting quote when he said that placed in a rotten barrel, sometimes a good apple could become bad. And that does happen a lot. Again, if you think about it, there's a lot of times that we probably do stuff that we regret doing. We don't know why we did it. We are upset that we do the behavior that we do, but it's because we get into those different roles sometimes without being a clear consciousness of what we're doing. And consequently then those behaviors affect our attitudes, our feelings, our emotions, and from that then we end up having other problems then. So we have to be careful with that. The second one that we're going to get into next then, the next slide anyway, is going to be talking about how attitude is affecting through classical and operant conditioning. Okay, so the second one now is how our attitudes are affected, again, by our behaviors, and this second example by the types of different behaviors dealing with classical and operant conditioning then. So the first one we're going to look at is classical conditioning. Okay, so there, what happens a lot of times is we may not be in a role situation. We may not be doing something in which the behavior is forcing an attitude change. Sometimes we may be doing something where we don't really have an attitude change about it at all. We may be totally neutral. We may not even care what's happening. But because of the different situations that's going on, that does begin to affect our attitudes. So what happens a lot of times is we have what's known as these neutral attitudes, and they can be changed because how that happens is you pair another object that naturally evokes an attitude with those neutral attitudes that causes that, and that's what's known as classical conditioning of an attitude. Okay, so for an example, altering a person's attitude towards words, altering a person's attitude towards social groups, pairing positive and negative objects to a neutral word or group. Now, what does all that mean? A lot of times, our feelings, our attitudes towards other people are affected by, even though we're not in a role situation where we're participating in it, we may be listening to it. So here as a small child, you hear two adults talking negatively about someone or something. The child is not engaged in it, so therefore they're not playing a role in the situation, but they're still picking up that information because it's being paired with another object that naturally evokes an attitude. Well, a child's parents is something that a child's going to look up to as a small kid, and so naturally that child's going to be stimulated by what their parents are doing and saying. So here the child is picking up information about their parents, about something negative, about a person or a group or whatever, and that builds into their brain. So then consequently, that child develops a negative attitude towards certain people or certain words too. A good example of the words one, in our society is the word Negro. That taken into context, it's a very negative word. It has a lot of negative attitude towards it. But again, if you think about it, it's just a word. Yet that word has developed such high emotions, high attitudes towards people because of what the consequences from that, the actions from what that word has brought through our history then. And there's a lot of other words that you can relate to that. Even not nearly as bad, but even still. When you hear someone talk about computer nerds, computer geeks, you pick on people and you call them names. Those kinds of things can evoke a very negative attitude, a very poor attitude. Along with that is the development of prejudices and racism. And that kind of, again, is something that relates back to what I was just talking about, that when you pair a neutral ethnic group with a negative racism word, those things begin to have an influence. And again, you can just think about, how often have you had or heard some of these negative things coming into your homes? When you hear parents talk about, I don't want to go to Walmart today, it's a weekend, all the Hispanics are going to be down there. Those kinds of words, those kinds of phrases are going to be things that's going to impair or to make your attitude negative towards a certain racial group. Even though it's not you acting on it, it's your parents, you're still being involved in it. And that's called classical conditioning, was where you're being conditioned to have an attitude towards a certain group or certain things based upon this connection of negativity of a word or of a group with the pairing of your parents is talking about it. We also get a lot of this through subliminal conditioning when we watch videos, when we watch ads, when we watch TV, and we pick up all these different advertisements from that. And again, we're going to watch a video on that in class, so we'll kind of go over that more in class. Operant conditioning is the other one. Now, operant conditioning is also where you can have a lot of changes going on with your attitude, but this is done through more connections with reinforcement and punishment. So, for example, here again, if you do something, you do a behavior, and you get a reward for it. So you go out to a party, and you are the life of the party, and you are just being a clown, and you're being, and everybody loves it, then that positive reinforcement you're getting from being able to behave like that is going to force you, I guess, to continue that type of behavior, because the emotional response you got from acting that way was positively reinforced. You're probably going to more likely redo that behavior again. If it was negatively reinforced, you would not do that behavior again. If you go up and ask somebody out and how you did that, and you get positively reinforced for that by the person saying yes, then basically you're going to, again, be rewarded to continue to do that type of behavior. So our behaviors are affected again, our attitudes are affected again, by the behaviors we do depending upon the negative or positive consequences that those behaviors get. Now sometimes we can pick that up by not doing it, but by observing others doing it. And that's what Albert Bandura talks about there with observable learning. So here again with this one, it's still operant conditioning, but the difference is you're not acting out on your behaviors now that's causing your attitude change. Somebody else is doing it. You're seeing it. You're seeing the consequences from their behaviors, actions, and it's changing your attitude to how it's being done. And again, if you can think about somebody maybe that you know really well that seems like they always have things going their way, everything they do turns out great, all of their behaviors ends up becoming somehow great and positive, then you try to emulate, you try to copy some of those behaviors that they're doing because you want to get the positive rewards from that too. That's what Bandura is talking about there. Okay, the next one we're going to get into then is what's called the foot in the door phenomenon, which we've already talked about this one before. And same with low ball. We've kind of got into those in different units. So we're just going to mention this again. This idea of foot in the door or patsyism is something that comes about when it's a tendency for people to have first agreed upon a small request and then they comply later to a large request. And I think I gave this example maybe in one of our previous classes when I talked about one of my brother-in-law who all the time he will call up and he will ask for a small favor. Something nothing too difficult, something I don't really want to go do, but it's not something really major. But then he will add on to that after I have agreed to do that, then he will add on a larger request. Well, a lot of times, that's how you get caught up in that because I've already agreed to the smaller one, so now the likelihood of me agreeing to the larger one is going to be much greater. It sounds strange that we do that, but in actuality, this is a trick that a lot of times businesses will use and other groups will use in order to change your attitude, to get you to do something that they want you to do. So they get you to do a behavior, a small behavior, and you're agreed to do that. Once you've agreed to that, your brain chemistry has taken over, so it has made your attitude change more acceptable and agreeable. So if you agreed to that, now the second request is much harder for you to negate or to go against. So you end up doing both requests that are being asked, whereas if they would ask the big request in the first place, you probably would have said no. A second technique that's used for this is called lowball technique, and it is also something that's highly used by businesses and many others as well. And what happens here a lot of times is you'll get maybe a phone call from a group trying to get you to donate some money. So they'll go through their spiel and they'll say, just if you can give $100, that'll be the greatest thing. They know you're not going to give $100, it's too much. So you say, no, I can't do $100, I'm sorry. Well, then they start the second part of the speech, which is getting you, again, to change, it gets you to change your behavior, your attitude by getting you to make the behavior. So you can't agree to the $100, but what they're trying to do then is they will knock it down. Well, how about just 50? 50's half. That's not free. Now all of a sudden it's reduced your tendency to negate that because you've just cut it by half. So let's say you're going to cut it again to 25. That's approximately what they're wanting to get out of you anyway, was the 25. Now, if they would have just offered that in the first place, you probably still would have said no. But because you said no on the first two, the 150, now you feel more obligated to saying yes to the 25. Because it's much lower of a number. And that's how a lot of groups and a lot of people are able to get you to change your attitude towards something. And it is by simply being able to manipulate your behaviors to get you to agree to it. And that's called lowball technique. The fourth one now we're going to get into is what's known as evil and moral acts. And basically what's getting into this one, which relates to what we've already been kind of talking about a little bit, is dealing with this concept about evil acts. Okay, we've all told lies. We've all kind of said things that's not true to other people. We embellish the truth. We embold the truth. We build it up. Those kinds of things. sometimes, we do these little white lies where you don't want to hurt someone's feelings, so you go ahead and you